The piano sat silent in the corner of David's living room for 3 years, its keys untouched since the day his father died. What started as Ellen's regular Monday show was about to become the most beautiful story of music healing a broken heart that television had ever witnessed. 15-year-old David Thompson sat nervously in the front row of Ellen's studio, his hands fidgeting in his lap as he avoided looking at the grand piano that dominated the stage. Beside him sat his mother, Catherine, who had written to Ellen's producers with a story that had moved them to tears about a musical prodigy who had stopped playing the day he lost his greatest teacher. Behind them sat David's piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, who had watched one of her most talented students retreat into silence after his father's sudden death from a heart attack. She'd tried everything to encourage David to return to the piano, but the instrument that had once brought him joy now only brought painful memories. Ellen was finishing her opening monologue when she noticed David in the audience, immediately drawn to the young man's obvious discomfort with the piano visible behind her. "I see we have a very talented musician in our audience today," Ellen said, approaching their section. David's face flushed with anxiety as Ellen's attention focused on him, his eyes still avoiding the grand piano that seemed to call to him from the stage. "I'm not really a musician anymore," he said quietly. Ellen knelt down beside David's seat, sensing immediately that this young man was carrying a weight far beyond his years. "David, your mom Catherine wrote to me about something very special that you and your father shared." Catherine reached over and squeezed her son's hand, providing the support that had sustained them both through 3 years of grief. David's father was a classical pianist, and he taught David everything he knew about music. "They used to play together every evening," Catherine continued, her voice filled with both pride and sadness. "It was their special time, just the two of them at the piano." Ellen felt her emotions stirring as she began to understand the depth of loss this family had experienced. "David, when did you stop playing?" "The day Dad died," David replied simply, his voice carrying 3 years of unresolved grief. "I haven't touched a piano since the funeral." Mrs. Chen spoke up, adding context that helped Ellen understand the magnitude of David's talent and loss. David was considered a prodigy before his father passed away. "He was accepted to Juilliard's pre-college program," Mrs. Chen continued with obvious pride in her former student, "but he withdrew his application after his father's death." Ellen stood up slowly, processing the tragedy of a young artist who had abandoned his gift due to grief. "David, what happens when you try to play now?" "I can't," David said, his voice breaking slightly as he spoke about his inability to connect with music. "Every time I sit at the piano, I hear Dad's voice teaching me, and then I remember he's not there anymore." Ellen's heart broke as she understood the impossible position grief had put this talented young man in between honoring his father's memory and continuing his own musical journey. "David, what do you think your father would say about you not playing?" "He'd probably be disappointed," David admitted, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Music was everything to him, and he wanted me to keep playing no matter what." Catherine added more details about her husband's passion for music and his dedication to teaching their son. "Michael used to say that music was the language of the soul, and that David had a gift that needed to be shared with the world." Ellen felt inspired by this father's wisdom and dedication to his son's musical education. "David, did your father leave you any musical pieces or compositions?" David's expression became even more pained as he prepared to share the most difficult part of his story. "He was working on a piece for me when he died. It was going to be my birthday present," David continued, his voice barely audible. "He called it David's Song, but he never got to finish it." Ellen felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized the profound gift this father had been preparing for his son. "David, do you remember any of the piece he was working on?" "Every note," David replied immediately, his musical memory intact despite years of silence. "I used to sit beside him while he composed it, and he would play each section over and over." Mrs. Chen leaned forward, adding information that would prove crucial to Ellen's understanding. "David has perfect pitch and an extraordinary musical memory. Even after 3 years of not playing, he could probably sit down and play anything he's ever heard." Mrs. Chen continued with admiration. "His talent is truly exceptional." Ellen walked toward the piano on her stage, her mind racing with possibilities for helping this young man reconnect with his gift. "David, Would you be willing to try something? David's anxiety spiked as he realized Ellen was suggesting he approach the piano that had become a symbol of his loss. I don't think I can. Ellen returned to David's side, understanding that this would require incredible courage from someone who had been paralyzed by grief. What if I told you that sometimes the best way to honor someone we've lost is to continue what they loved most? Your father spent years teaching you music because he wanted it to live on through you, Ellen continued gently. By not playing, you're silencing the part of him that lives in your hands. Catherine wiped away her own tears as she watched Ellen help her son confront the grief that had stolen his passion. David, Dad would want you to play. Ellen made a decision that would transform this moment from grief counseling into musical healing. David, I want to ask you something that might sound impossible. She gestured toward the piano with reverence for what it represented. Would you be willing to try playing your father's unfinished piece? David's face went pale as he processed the magnitude of what Ellen was asking. I've never played it because it wasn't finished. What if we finished it together? Ellen suggested, offering a way to complete his father's final musical gift. What if we let your heart tell us how the song should end? Mrs. Chen encouraged her former student with the wisdom of someone who understood the healing power of music. David, music is meant to be shared, especially music filled with love. David looked around the studio, seeing hundreds of faces offering support for his moment of truth. What if I can't remember how to play? Ellen smiled gently, recognizing the fear that often accompanies returning to something we've lost. David, you don't forget how to speak the language of your heart. Slowly, David stood up from his seat, his legs shaky as he approached the piano that represented both his greatest joy and deepest pain. The studio fell completely silent as everyone understood they were witnessing something sacred. David sat down at the piano bench, his hands hovering over the keys as 3 years of silence prepared to end. Ellen positioned herself nearby, ready to provide support for whatever emotions might emerge. This is for you, Dad, David whispered, and then his fingers touched the keys for the first time in 3 years. The first notes of David's song filled the studio with a beauty that transcended technique and touched the soul. As David played his father's unfinished composition, something magical began to happen in Ellen's studio. The melody seemed to flow directly from his heart, each note carrying years of unexpressed love and grief. The audience was completely mesmerized, as they witnessed not just a performance, but a conversation between father and son conducted through music. Ellen watched with tears streaming down her face as David's talent emerged stronger than ever. When David reached the point where his father's composition had ended, he paused for just a moment. Then, guided by instinct and love, he began to create the conclusion his father had never been able to write. The music that flowed from David's hands was both technically brilliant and emotionally profound, a perfect fusion of his father's teaching and his own artistic voice. Ellen realized she was witnessing the birth of a new piece of music born from pure love. As David played the final notes of the completed David's song, the studio erupted in the kind of applause that comes from witnessing something transcendent. Ellen approached the piano where David sat, crying tears of release and healing. David, Ellen said softly, your father just heard every note through your hands. David looked up at Ellen with eyes that had rediscovered hope and purpose. Ellen addressed the audience about what they had just witnessed, recognizing the profound healing that had occurred. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just heard music that proves love never dies, it just finds new ways to sing. Mrs. Chen approached the piano with obvious pride in her student's breakthrough and returned to music. David, that was the most beautiful performance I've ever heard you give. Ellen had been working behind the scenes on a surprise that would honor David's father while supporting his future. David, I have something to tell you that I think will make this day even more special. She walked to her desk and returned with official documents that would change David's musical future. Juilliard heard about your story, and they want to reinstate your acceptance to their pre-college program. David's mouth fell open in shock as he processed the opportunity that was being restored to him. They still want me after 3 years? Not only do they want you, Ellen continued, but they're offering you a full scholarship in honor of your father's memory. The audience erupted in celebration as they realized David's dreams were being resurrected. Catherine was sobbing with joy as she watched her son's passion for music being restored along with his future opportunities. "David, this is what Dad always wanted for you." Ellen had one more surprise that would complete David's healing and honor his father's legacy. "David, I've also arranged for something else." She gestured toward the wings of the stage where a recording engineer appeared with professional equipment. "We're going to record David's song so that your father's composition, completed by you, will live forever." David was overwhelmed by the magnitude of support and recognition being offered to him in his father's memory. "You want to record Dad's song? It's not just your dad's song anymore," Ellen replied with wisdom that helped David understand his role in the music's evolution. "It's both of yours, a collaboration between father and son that transcends death." As the recording session began, David played David's song with even greater confidence and emotional depth. The completed composition became a testament to the enduring power of love and musical legacy. Ellen's closing words that day became an inspiration for grieving families everywhere. "Music is the sound of love that never dies. It just waits for the right moment to sing again." David's story became a beacon of hope for young artists who had lost their mentors. 6 months later, David returned to Ellen's show to share his progress at Juilliard and to premiere a new composition he'd written called Ellen's Gift. His confidence had grown exponentially, and his father's musical legacy lived on through his talented hands. "The most amazing thing," David told Ellen during his return visit, "is that I feel closer to my dad now when I play than I did when I was avoiding the piano." Music had become a bridge between past and present, loss and healing. The recording of David's song became a best-selling single, with proceeds going to music therapy programs for grieving children. David's story had opened conversations about using art to process loss and had inspired countless young musicians to continue playing despite personal tragedy. Ellen kept the sheet music for David's song framed in her office, a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from the deepest pain. David's father's final composition, completed by his son's love, had become proof that creativity transcends death. The piano that had sat silent in David's living room for 3 years now filled his home with music every evening. His father's presence lived on in every note, every lesson remembered, every moment when music became a conversation between generations. Because sometimes the most powerful performances happen not on concert stages, but in moments when grief transforms into gratitude and silence becomes song. David Thompson had learned that his father's greatest gift wasn't just musical technique, but the understanding that love finds its voice through the courage to keep creating. The piano keys that once felt cold and lifeless under David's fingers now sang with warmth, carrying both his father's wisdom and his own evolving artistry. Every morning David sat at the same piano where his father had taught him, but now the music they created together was a duet between memory and possibility, grief and joy, ending and beginning. Years later, when David became a renowned pianist himself, he would always introduce David's song by saying, "This piece was written by my father and finished by love." The composition became his signature piece, played at concerts around the world, proving that some collaborations transcend death and that the most beautiful music is born when broken hearts choose to sing again. The silence that had lasted 3 years was replaced by a symphony that would last forever, echoing through concert halls and touching hearts across generations. David had learned that his father's death hadn't ended their musical conversations. It had simply taught him to hear his father's voice in every note he played, transforming the piano from a symbol of loss into an instrument of eternal connection. Every night before bed, David now plays a few notes of David's song as a lullaby for his father's spirit, knowing that somewhere in the melody, his dad is still teaching him to find beauty in the midst of sorrow. The piano bench where they once sat together now holds 2 musicians, one visible, one felt, creating harmonies that bridge the gap between memory and hope. The framed photograph of his father that sits atop David's piano has become more than a memorial. It's a witness to every practice session, every breakthrough, every moment when music transforms pain into purpose. Students who come to learn from David often notice how he glances at the photo before beginning difficult pieces, as if asking permission to soar on wings his father helped him grow. In conservatories around the world, young musicians now study David's song, not just for its technical brilliance, but for its emotional truth, that the most profound music is born when we find the courage to complete what love began. David's fingers may have finished the composition, but it was his father's heart that wrote the ending, proving that some songs echo through generations, teaching us that love is indeed the only music that never truly ends.